Uncensored on the Land of Israel Network at thelandofisrael.com. It is Monday, July the 30th, 2018, the 18th of Av, 5778. I am here in beautiful Jerusalem. I would say this is between the Baca neighborhood and the German colony here. Wonderful, wonderful morning here in Jerusalem. So glad you could join us here on the Land of Israel Network. Don't forget, you can always get in touch with me during the week. Josh at thelandofisrael.com, on Facebook, Joshua Hasten, and on Twitter at Josh Hasten. A lot going on as usual in the world of news. Nothing ever changes here. There's never a dull moment. If you're bored anywhere out there in the world, and you're a Jew, and you're sitting and you're looking around trying to find things to do, and you want some action, Israel's the place, for better or for worse. Now, usually for better. Unfortunately, there's some sad news we'll cover here in just a few minutes. But thank God we are alive. We have a state, we have a country, and we're proud to say so here in Jerusalem, our capital city. I am here with a good friend here on the show today, Danny Seaman. He is the editor of the English edition of Mida, the online magazine, also former director of the Israel Government Press Office, also a good friend of mine, and a former colleague at the old station, as we call it, Voice of Israel. He was a chief producer at the station, one of the top guys there at VOI, Voice of Israel. Danny, welcome back to Israel Uncensored here on the Land of Israel Network at thelandofisrael.com.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
So we're here in this beautiful park. Hopefully it won't be too much background noise here, but I want to talk about everything going on in the news this week. Let's start with Shirley Temper, as she is known. Ahed Tamimi, the 18-year-old terrorist who was imprisoned in an Israeli jail for striking an IDF soldier. She was released to a hero's welcome yesterday. She held a press conference, of course, also welcomed as a hero in the Mukata with PA head Mahmoud Abbas. So I want to know, Danny, what's the over-under? What are they saying in Las Vegas in terms of how many days will she remain outside of prison before she does something and has to go back, obviously coming from a long line of terrorists and her family? How long until she's back in jail, Danny?
I personally would say not soon enough, but and it doesn't matter when. The issue is she's not a terrorist. She's an agent provocateur. She is one of these people who deliberately seek out confrontations with the Israelis because it's good footage. Here she looks younger than she actually is. She looks Western. She's not like this Arab, but she's blondish. And she's learned that it's beneficial, and it's financially beneficial for her and her family to engage in this kind of provocations against the Israeli forces. There's debate in Israel whether or not the last time when she struck the soldier, should the officer have responded or not. I think considering that it was a trap being set up for him and there was no way he could win, but he did the right thing. They're not being drawn into the provocation and responding, because at that point nobody would have been talking about her. They would have been talking about him and the abuse of Israeli soldiers, blah, blah, blah. So it's very smart not to fall into that trap right there. But this is obviously, this is not going to end. And I think we have to, my problem with the government officials are that they don't understand this is a family of provocateurs, and it should be treated as such. I mean, you don't have to do everything in front of the camera. There are things that can be done behind the scenes. And that means that this family has to be addressed as not an enemy in that sense, except for those elements in the family who were suicide bombers and terrorists. But the family itself should be seen as hostile. And immediately, at any point they try to do anything, they come near our forces, should be immediately apprehended and arrested. No two ways about it. They have a history of that. It should be known that they're doing it, and always take into account that they're being escorted by hundreds, about dozens at least, of foreign agents who are here in Israel and abusing the democracy we have here and allowing them to come, and they're waiting with their cameras just to catch the Jews doing something bad. So don't give it to them.
But this girl, let me ask you, you mentioned a potential future confrontation, and I think it's inevitable, but she came out of prison right away and already praised the so-called resistance. I mean, essentially called for more attacks on Israelis. She actually said it, in the press conference, and said we have to keep fighting and to continue the resistance against Israel or whatnot. I mean, that already could be, I guess, if that was analyzed, her speech in the context that could already be analyzed, I believe, as incitement to violence. I mean, shouldn't the authorities have been right there and arrested her on the spot, put her right back in jail? Because obviously she hasn't changed in 8 months.
She's not going to change. She's only going to be continuing with this. But the problem, first off, we couldn't arrest her. She's in the area of the Palestinian Authority, the PA. The problem is not her. She's a symptom of the problem. The problem is the PA, is the fact that she was surrounded by members of the Palestinian Authority, the leadership. Abbas was there, and they all encourage this and support this. So they're the problem, and the problem is even greater than that. The problem is not them. The problem is the government of Israel, which tolerates this and continues to tolerate it and turn a blind eye to it instead of putting their foot down and saying enough, because this is costing the lives of Israelis. This is not just hate speech. This is incitement, which creates people like this kid and others. I think we'll talk about this later on, this other 17-year-old who murdered an Israeli this week. So this talk has consequences, and the consequences usually is in Jewish life.
Yeah, when you incite to violence, to terror against Israel, and that goes unpunished, and that is, the world organizations. I don't even care about it anymore, by the way, and we can talk about that. I'm done with caring about what the world thinks, or the UN thinks, or the EU thinks, and we really got to do what we need to do in terms of combating terror, and we'll talk about that now. I'm done waiting for condemnations, especially not from the Palestinian Authority and not world leaders, but we'll see where that goes. So let's get right to this, the very tragic, sad story out of the community of Adam, which is just 5-10 minutes outside of Jerusalem to the north. 31-year-old Yotam Ovadia, may God avenge his blood, was murdered in a terror attack on Thursday night, which is the Jewish, I don't want to say Valentine's Day, but it's the Jewish day of love. I mean, it's supposed to be that on Yom Kippur, actually, are the happiest days on the Jewish calendar. He was on his way to prepare some sort of, I think, meal for his wife in honor of the holiday. A 17-year-old jihadist from a nearby village just north of Ramallah enters the community, jumps over the security barrier, and starts slashing Israelis, whomever he could find. Unfortunately, Yotam Ovadia, may rest in peace, was murdered. My question to you is this. I mean, we've seen this thousands of times, really, hundreds, thousands of times. So many people murdered over the last, 15, 20 years, and we can go back. Actually, today's actually the anniversary of the massacre in Hebron back in 1929. Today's the yortzeit of all those, the 60-plus Jews massacred. So it's not a new phenomenon. But what do you think? I saw images of the Israeli IDF closing off the village for the time being, getting prepared to perhaps destroy the terrorist's house. I doubt that'll ever happen. They'll probably end up destroying his room because the Supreme Court will get involved. Is this any different? How can we expect Israel to respond, Danny? And what does this mean for our safety and security here in Israel as we go forward?
It's another symptom. It's interesting. All in all, life here is perhaps the best it's ever been for Jews in our entire history. We are at the strongest we've ever been. We're at the most prosperous that we've ever been. I'm talking going back to biblical times. We took about 3,000 years. This is the best situation we've ever been in the entire history of the state of Israel. Look, we're arguing here amongst ourselves on a law, and a basic law that was passed in the Knesset. That's the big debate here,
which we'll talk about in a minute.
So may those be our problems. Considering other circumstances we've been in, we can all be very happy. But the fact is, this country should be safe for all Jews and for all Israelis and for all the people in the state of Israel. And there'll always be those seeking on it. It's always been that way. The state of Israel, we do our best, but I think many of us are not pleased. They don't believe the government is doing enough. We're in an area that actions speak louder than words, and we're not doing the proper actions. We're talking a lot. Unfortunately, a lot of our leaders are engaged in tweeting and putting posts on Facebook, which is good for bloggers and for the individuals, but for government, I think it's an embarrassment. They should talk less and do more, and not make statements towards the enemy, but to do, and we have the ability to take action. I'm not going to go into the situation in Gaza, for example, where there are other things involved in whether or not we take action there. It's keeping our sight on the ball, keeping our sight on what's going on with Iran, which is the greater threat to Israel. But when it comes to the individual terrorism here, such as this boy who announced it before he left, he put it on Facebook. It's amazing if Facebook can block content that they're not pleased about, but content calling. And he was saying he's going to go out and murder Jews, and he's received and accepted as a hero in his society. And part of this is the fact that the international community continues to support the fact that the Palestinian Authority takes money that is given to them as aid for their people and are diverting it to members, to terrorist families, families of those terrorists who perished, and those who are in our prisons. And in a sense, they're funding and encouraging. The money they get paid for that is more than any job they have in the Palestinian Authority. And that's the absurdity of it. To murder Jews is more prosperous for them, and they become more heroic, and they have streets and schools named after them. And the international community is collaborating with this by not putting their foot down and saying enough is enough. And the same with the government of Israel. We should also be making it very clear to them there are steps that we can take. We take away the privileges of the leadership of the Palestinian Authority, allowing them to prance around the world, to travel in and out and through Gaza. There are things that we can do that we're not doing. Why? It's hard for me to say. Is it laziness? It's afraid to change the status quo. Any Jew murdered is a change of the status quo. And until the government starts treating it in that way and viewing it that way, that we have a zero tolerance. That means not a single Jew should be murdered here. Not, it's good now, only one was killed. No, that one, as we say in Hebrew, is olam v'mlo. It's a world abound. His family, his children, everybody is affected by that. And not to mention the loss of that individual's life. And by the way, in his death, he prevented the death of others because he was a former border policeman. And he fought him off. After being stabbed, after having his throat slit, he fought off the terrorist and held him until other people came by and prevented him continuing his rampage.
Yeah, he is a hero. I saw new video evidence of that just the other day, and I agree with you, and not only in terms of the international community, but in terms of our own government. I mean, the Knesset approved this anti-pay-to-slay law, which is supposed to withhold PA funding the same amount that goes that the PA pays to the terror tax. I don't know if that's been implemented yet. I know it's been passed, but I doubt, Israel, things take time. I doubt that's been passed, number one. And secondly, I agree that we should not tolerate even one attack, whether it's a fire, kite, or balloon from Gaza, or it is an infiltration that results in the loss of Israeli lives here. There are many other things we can do. I don't know why the PA is entitled to internet, for example. I don't know why. This is where the incitement comes from on a daily basis, so why are we turning the other cheek, so to speak, and allowing them to have internet? So I definitely agree with you. More can be done. And I want to speak on one other topic today, and that is, and I saw your performance on I-24 News discussing this as well just several days ago. This morning's headline is that Prime Minister Netanyahu, he adamantly yesterday in the cabinet meeting, his weekly cabinet meeting, defended the nation-state law. He attacked the what he called the left's criticism of it. And here we are now, I think a week or two after the nation-state law has been passed. Just to give you an example, I interviewed M.K. Ohana of the Likud Party just several weeks ago actually right after this was passed for an article I was working on, and he said, I understand if the Arabs bring this to the forefront and have an issue with it and make us think about it, even though it does nothing to discriminate them if you actually read the text against Arabs or Druze or anybody else. He says, I don't understand how the so-called Zionist parties, even if they are in the opposition, how could be opposed to such a basic principle that Israel is the state of the Jewish people. So what is your take on the nation-state law and the fact now the Prime Minister is going on the offensive against those so-called Zionist parties who are now attacking him and the policy?
Well, what's unfortunate is that they are so involved in their own politics, and we see this throughout the world where the left has really gone off the deep end. They forget that there is an accepted attitude within democratic societies that there's issues of fair play. We all play according to certain rules. You see that happening in the United States. It's happened here for years, where once they don't get what they want, they forget about those rules. And this is a clear indication of this. So there should be something we all agree upon, is the issue of the Jewish state. That's the whole raison d'etre of our existence here, is the fact that we're the Jewish state. And it says nothing about rights. And by the way, it's not a law that stands on its own. It is part of basic laws of Israel, and there are other laws that address the issues and rights of individuals in this country. So nobody's harmed by this. But they're taking this and turning it into a political issue, and not understanding that their criticism is also being used by people around the world to criticize the state of Israel. It's not only irresponsible, it's they're joining hands with the enemies of the state of Israel, and not for the first time, unfortunately, and they don't see it and they don't understand that. So they're attacking this, which if they were decent about it, they would understand that they can have their criticisms, but to oppose it, there's a lot more behind this. And what is behind this is that right-wing, left-wing divide, or more to the point, that what they call the civil society that they're trying to impose on the state of Israel. We've had an imbalance as a result, as a consequence of having only partial basic laws, which are supposed to be a future constitution. And that imbalance was that up until now, civil rights took precedent over the rights of the country to represent what it's supposed to represent, the nation of the Jewish people. This comes in to balance that. Now the Supreme Court just can't say and rely on things and cancel laws instituted by the government and saying, well, it's against the basic law, and completely ignore what they claim, that all the law exists in the Declaration of Independence. But nowhere has the Supreme Court quoted or invoked the Declaration of Independence to preserve rights of Jews in this country, or the principles of this being a Jewish country. So without that, for example, and there was this movement of people saying, well, the Tikva can't be the national anthem of the state of Israel because it doesn't represent all of its people, or the flag of the Magen David. And people don't realize that there was this movement. Right now it's on the extreme fringes, but so were other laws, and so were other statements about the state of Israel, such as, for example, giving the advantage to new immigrants, the right of return law. There are people saying that this discriminates against non-Jewish Israeli citizens. So it pulls the rug beneath the identity of this country as being the Jewish state. And nobody invoked the Declaration of Independence. Now they have a basic law that balances it out, and that's what they're so unhappy about, because they had ulterior motives that were designed to undermine the Jewishness of this state. Yet they were not. Now, there are some useful idiots who don't understand that, and immediately, when it's a right-wing, left-wing thing, they jump in and they demonstrate. They have no idea. And the most ridiculous thing of this whole thing was that Israelis who were opposed to it were being interviewed on the media, and some of these Anshei Ruach, all sorts of cultural writers, etc., and they were mixing up different laws and different things going on. They have no idea. They didn't even sit and read the thing.
That's what I was going to say. So many people commented without even reading what it said.
And it's one page long. And it just reiterates everything in the Declaration of Independence, but turns it into law. And they're the ones who uphold the law and waive the issue of law all the time. So you have these useful idiots who don't know, but it's immediately, if they're opposed to anything that smells of right wing, and they're being used by those who have an ulterior motive and a sinister motive. And it's a good thing that this law was passed.
And then, of course, those, as you mentioned, those on the outside of Israel, they used this as more fodder against the Jewish state, calling Israel an apartheid state and criticizing Israel when, as I read the article in the Wall Street Journal by Eugene Kontorovich from the Kohelet Policy Forum, who explains that many countries have Western nations have not only similar, but even stricter laws in their books when it comes to nationality in their individual countries. So this is actually a pretty parv new law which was passed just here in Israel recently. But yet again, Israel held to a different standard, as is the case each and every day, because it's Israel, you know. Go ahead.
Exactly. You started out by saying, making that point exactly, and it doesn't matter what we do. There are going to be those who criticize, so we shouldn't worry about it. We should stop. We're not in the ghettos anymore.
Amen.
We're in our own nation. We're powerful. We're strong. We're prosperous. It's a wonderful country, safer than any place else in the world right now. We're going in the right direction. We have I think the greatest indication, and we had this here, if you heard it in the background, babies and children, and we have the largest birth rate among the secular secular population in the Western world, like 3 times more than the rest of the Western world, because people here are optimistic and people here are happy, and children are the greatest indication of that. And this is a country that is very open to children and embraces children, and that we shouldn't worry about the other people, and we should do what is in our best interest. Nobody cared about us over generations and centuries. Nobody wanted us to have a state. They just felt a little guilty. They exaggerated during the Holocaust. They took things a bit too far, and maybe we should give them. And what did they offer us, by the way, going into a total different thing? They offered us in 1947 something they expected us to reject, because nobody in their right mind would have accepted that suicidal borders that we were offered as a state. Yet we surprised them, we took it, and we survived, and we continue to survive and thrive, and we'll continue doing that if we just do what is in our own best interest.
Amen to that, and I hope, on one hand, I hope that this advanced microphone blocked out the sounds as another electric bike passes me. But then again, you had a woman who was tending to her crying baby. You had a bunch of children here enjoying the beautiful summer, talking amongst themselves, and cars passing by, and more bikes and joggers and runners.
And Jews and Arabs walking.
That's
right
true.
there.
Did you see that? Yeah, I saw, I don't know, a woman, what nationality she was, assisting an elderly Arab woman walking down the beautiful path here in the park of Baca.
That's the real Jerusalem. That's people living together here.
That's true, and 99% of the time it's nice and normal. Unfortunately, there are those who don't want to see a beautiful Jerusalem. They ruin it for everyone else. It's always a pleasure to speak to Danny Seaman, an old friend, editor of the English edition of Mida. Check them out online. What is the website, Danny?
It's very easy. It's en.mida.org.il.
Go check out the important work and the important articles and commentary they're giving you at Mida Magazine. Danny Seaman, always great to have you on the program.
My pleasure. Always great to sit with you.
And in other news, more than 255 killed, 14 women kidnapped in Syria. This was an ISIS attack on a Druze city just the other day, reported by our good friend Seth Franzman in the Jerusalem Post. And the headline actually reads, Israeli Druze March in Solidarity After ISIS Massacre. And if you haven't heard about this story, perhaps it's because it had nothing to do with Israel. Israel did not carry out the massacre. ISIS did. And I was actually looking on Twitter to see the response from the UN. And if you look at the official UN page at UN, you see that they have a vaguely worded response condemning the massacre, not even mentioning that these were Druze who were killed in Syria. So just one statement, as far as I can see here on Twitter, released by the UN. And then again, as I said before, when Israel's not involved, it's barely news. 255 civilians, 255, and the UN continues to worry about Jews building pergolas in Judea. Also in the news, and this really affects me personally as I grew up in Indianapolis, Indiana, the JTA reports printed in the J-Post, suburban Indianapolis synagogue vandalized. I actually saw this from a friend back in Indiana on Facebook, showing that a swastika was painted outside the Sharei Tefillah conservative synagogue in Carmel, Indiana, just north of Indianapolis, on Shabbat morning. Services continued as usual, and the Jewish community now taking extra measures for security there in my hometown of Indianapolis. Yet another example that 70 years plus after the Holocaust, anti-Semitism is alive and well, whether it's in Indianapolis or here within the Palestinian Authority in Israel. Anti-Semitism alive and well. Vice President Mike Pence sending his best wishes to the community there in Indianapolis. Of course, being the former governor of the state of Indiana, former congressman, posting on Twitter, specifically singling out Congregation Sharei Tefillah and his friends there and wishing them the best, and talking about how we all have to combat this phenomenon of anti-Semitism, which, by the way, didn't just start, for those of you who are Trump haters, didn't just start under the current administration, okay? This is a 3,000-year-old issue, so people should know that. And just finishing off with some good news here. In the state of Israel, the famous band Clean Bandit performed at the Rishon LeZion Park this past Thursday night. Amy Spiro in the Jerusalem Post says it was a memorable show with 10,000 people in attendance there to hear the group Clean Bandit. Just another small victory against the BDS Israel haters. Thank you, Clean Bandit, and thank you to everyone else who comes and shows their support for the state of Israel or just comes to perform here in Israel, and by doing so sends a message that the BDS haters out there won't win. We're here to stay, and I'm very, very happy when groups are willing to perform here in the Jewish state of Israel. That's it for today's show here on Israel Uncensored, Land of Israel Network at thelandofisrael.com. It is the 30th of July, 2018. Get in touch with me during the week. Josh at thelandofisrael.com. On Facebook, it's Joshua Hasten. On Twitter, at Josh Hasten. I am here in beautiful Jerusalem. And most importantly, between now and when we speak again next week, everybody out there in the wonderful world of ours, be safe. Shalom, shalom from Jerusalem, capital of the beautiful state of Israel.